The following San Francisco IGDA event was recorded on April 14th, 2016 at Dolby Labs in San Francisco. Our speaker has been a tech journalist for more than 25 years and has covered games for 18 years. He is lead writer for GamesBeat at VentureBeat and the author of 2 books, Opening the Xbox and the Xbox 360 Uncloaked. We invite you to enjoy a fireside chat with Dean Takahashi.
You were saying you feel like you're in a similar situation that you were about 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of wanted to start with that because it seems quite interesting.
Maybe I describe some of my career too,
Sure.
because you get a sense for how journalists bounce around a lot. So I started 25 years ago. I was in newspapers. I got a job at the Dallas Times-Herald for my first job, and one of my first assignments was to cover a triple murder.
Wow.
And I had about a week of this or so, and they asked me if I wanted to transfer into the business section because they were short on people there. And I said, hey, that sounds a little better. So I did that, and have been a business writer ever since. Some people left the newspaper and they said, hey, there's a tech job open, you want that too? And I said, sure. And I covered airlines as well, and then nobody was covering games really, and so there were I could pick that up too. I switched over to the Orange County Register and then the LA Times. There, 25 years ago, I started covering companies like Brian Fargo's Interplay and Virgin Interactive and Chaos Studios back then, and that was Blizzard. And so I wrote the first story on those guys, and I felt like, wow, this is fun. This is something I can relate to. They're making Lord of the Rings games and things like that, which I could relate to. And eventually, I got to the Wall Street. I transferred up to Silicon Valley in 1994 when Netscape was starting. It was a very exciting time. I worked at the Mercury News for a couple of years, switched to Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal started caring about a lot of things in tech, including games, in the 90s. And I was the youngest guy in the office at the Wall Street Journal, and so they said, do you want to cover games? I said, sure. So I started mostly, so sort of like a full beat covering games for 20 years now, starting at the Journal. And I switched to Red Herring magazine and was there when I wrote a book on the making of the original Xbox, and switched again to San Jose Mercury News. And at that point, blogs were starting up in the 2000s. Newspapers were hurting. I think somebody had recorded that like over 7 years, 50,000 newspaper jobs had been eliminated. And so it was almost like a matter of time before, we, it was more like it was a greater risk for me and my career to stay at a newspaper than to go to a tiny little startup and start blogging. And so I switched 8 years ago to VentureBeat. I've been at VentureBeat ever since. And it's the longest I've ever held a job. And it's surprising. I've sort of grown up with it. When I joined, there were 5 people. We have about 40-something people now. So we're not that big still, but we make a lot of noise. And we started doing events. And you can ask me why we started doing events as well.
Would it be better if maybe you interview yourself? Because I wanted to ask you why you got. I want to go back and say why were you into video games to begin with? I mean, you didn't. Was it that the triple homicide was so dramatic that you're like, oh, games are fun, or was it that you grew up playing games and that was a passion of yours?
I grew up playing games, and say the very first game I ever played was Pong, and I got excited about it right when it first came out. It was in the first time I saw it was in the Tropicana Hotel in Las Vegas at in a lounge for their indoor tennis courts, and it was like a luxury lounge. And they had this really fancy thing called a little tabletop arcade game.
Wow. Okay. So you were from the beginning. You were you saw video games and you were hooked, and then But you entered, you started out as a journalist. That was your first profession, and has always been your profession. But why journalism?
I also liked writing. I liked reading. Wasn't good at math, so it eliminated a lot of careers when that happened, I guess. So, but yeah, it was fun. I had strong opinions. I think I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. Uncover injustices around the world, things like that. So very idealistic reasons for going into it. I read things like the New York Times from a fairly early age, and I always wondered how they put these stories together, these tales, right? And then I read things like The Soul of a New Machine by Tracy Kidder, and in that he makes this really boring topic of designing computers, mini computers back then, into a really riveting story, because he tells the story of like a couple of teams at Data General. They didn't know that they were working on the same project, basically. I mean, they had two different solutions. One team was going one route, another team was going another route, and they were essentially competing with each other, and their CEO pit them against each other without them realizing it. And you're like a fly on the wall in this process, and it's a very emotional, traumatic journey that these guys make, and you feel like you are right there as they make these decisions. And so that's like fun reading, and that's what was sort of the original inspiration for my book on the making of the Xbox. That I wanted to recreate what it felt like to be there at the beginning of this thing. Right? So,
yeah, it's interesting because I think for a lot of game developers, it's only when they look back do they reflect on how interesting that process was, and while they're in it, it's a nightmare, and and you're trying to keep your head above water. So what was the question that you wanted me to ask you?
Oh, why do we do events? Was one.
Oh yeah.
Right?
So why do you do events?
Well, I'm a journalist. Like, I write stories. We cover the news, and that sort of should be enough. That should be our business, right? But it's not easy to make money on the internet, right? There's a billion writers on the internet, and they all compete with things that I write, and ad rates are not like they once were in the days of newspapers or magazines. They're constantly falling, right? So we can write more and more and get more and more traffic, but the ad rates keep falling, and so it's almost like we're running in place if that is our business, right? So Matt Marshall kind of realized this fairly early on, and we're competing with other blogs out there like TechCrunch to be essentially, say, like the voice of Silicon Valley or something like that, right? And they started doing events, and so we started doing some events as well. And instead of going to beg the different sort of newsmakers to let us into their press conferences and their events, we sort of turned it around and said, okay, we're going to set up an exclusive event, and we'll invite who gets into it, and we'll see who comes to us, and we'll try to make some of this news happen as well. So our event can be like a neutral ground for the industry to come together and talk, and to sort of try to outdo each other. I keep going to all these events at E3 every year, and I always refer to them as like Soviet-style press conferences, because they talk at you and you don't ask questions. When you're done, that's it. So they're talking at you, they're delivering a message. There's all kinds of company-sponsored events out there. And so where are the events where you can actually come gather, hear different perspectives from different companies and different speakers, and all sort of hash things out.
Yeah.
So that's the original reason we started doing this. Plus, we can make money at the events, and it sort of offsets the fact that it's hard to make money with just advertising on news stories.
Yeah. The events, well, so far I've been to GamesBeat, and I was literally blown away by the quality of the event and the people in attendance, and yeah, it's remarkable. If anyone hasn't been to one of these, you need to go, because the quality of the networking and the speakers, you have people speak for about 20 minutes, and they're all, the people guiding the industry. I mean, how did that happen? I mean, how did you get all of those people in a room like that?
Well, we've been doing it for eight years now, and the events have been growing over time. And it's almost as if their other choices for events were going away as well. GDC is still very strong, but it's hard to name a lot of other places where people can come out for this kind of opportunity, where they get to do an interview and they get to talk to a very high-end audience. We've always tried to make it as high-end as we can, both with the speakers and the audience, and then to talk to a very large audience through the stream as well. So we try to make it an attractive opportunity for people to come and get heard, I guess, right? So and it's more a reflection of where we chose to specialize to. One of the columns I wrote recently in my Dean Beat column was about why we're still here, when a lot of other media publications, game publications, have disappeared, and YouTubers are grabbing a ton of the attention in the game business now, and plain old writers like us are sort of seeming like we're less valued. So why are we still here? And it's because we always try to sort of get to the right elevation where we can understand what's happening in the industry and explain it to people and add some context, and do the best high quality piece of journalism we can. And like a lot of the game press, I thought was sort of writing at too low an elevation, and maybe writing game to game to game, review to review to review, and not understanding that this industry was changing, right? And so 10 years ago, it was a $25 billion console, mostly console business, some PC, and now it's a $90 billion business, and there's still a $25 billion console business, right? It hasn't gone away, but it hasn't grown either. And the parts of the industry that have grown are the things that we wrote a lot about. So mobile, PC, free-to-play, games around the world, around the globe. We've traveled a lot to different countries to cover these stories. So that's why I think we're still here. And I think that's how we're able to attract some of the right people to the conferences too.
Right.
Because it's changed so much, people have a lot of questions about like what's coming next.
Yeah.
We have no clue, because who would have predicted all of the things that happened in the game industry in the last 5 years or so? Right?
Do you think that when you talk about the feeling of having this somewhat of an existential crisis? No, but this article.
When I hit 25 years, I was like reflecting a lot about like, what am I doing with my life?
What have I done? Right. Yeah. So when you think about that, and you think about sort of the state that the industry is in for journalists, do you think that it's because the industry has had this sort of domino effect? Like a lot of the industry has been in trouble. Consoles were in trouble, and then social disappeared pretty much, and then now mobile's starting to plateau, and then you've got all these new opportunities. And do you think online media is starting to sort of, is that the next domino that's falling, or do you?
I think everybody who pivots well still winds up being in a good spot. Like I've noticed, there are new publications that have come along that weren't there before. Like Upload VR is very closely covering the VR industry. They just hired Robert Scoble as like one of their people, one of their voices. Like he's an entrepreneur in residence there. And Scoble has a big following. He's like one of the most well-known tech journalists there is. And he's decided, hey, hey, this is the second coming of something great. I'm gonna put everything I do now is going to be focused on AR and VR, and so that's sort of an educated choice that he's made. Road to VR is another publication. So some of these smaller publications are coming up. We then ask ourselves, okay, should we become, should GamesBeat become VRBeat, and should we switch because this is the hot new thing, and will we, grow much faster because of that? And our answer right now is no, because we think games is sort of still the right focus for us, and games across a bunch of platforms. We don't necessarily vote on one particular platform as being the winner or the best one, there's a lot of platforms that sort of come and go, and they may be hot for a year or two, but we wouldn't want to change our name in a year or two after the VR bubble kind of blows up and disappears and gets replaced by something else.
Right.
Right. So our
2 years
kind of stance as a publication is that games will always be important and will stay important, and it will be a very interesting business and innovative area of innovation that people want to hear about, and so we're focused on that wherever it goes.
Right. So you're giving 2 years for VR, and then it's going to explode.
It could very well succeed as well, in which case we'd still be covering it.
Yeah.
And so we don't lose by having this position that we have as well.
What is your opinion of VR? Because it is sort of the new hotness and everything. Everybody's kind of interested in developing for it. What's your experience been like so far with the?
So I've got a HTC Vive and a Samsung Gear VR and a Oculus headset as well, and I haven't had too much time to play with them. That's one of the problems of being a game journalist, is that the more you write, the less you play. So I'm trying to carve out some time to play with them, and I like the fact that I see a lot of experiences that you can only do in VR, and the different kinds of things you could do include just going like this and this, right? And shooting two guns, different directions, when you're surrounded by zombies or surrounded by, in the Servios game by robots, right? And that's a lot of fun to do this, and you can't do that in a video game. In a video game, on a console, you're looking at one screen like this with your hands like this, right? And so this is novel. This is something cool. It's different. It's new, and it gets you a little tired. Gets you some exercise, for once. These are all good things that that are great. And I think the example of that they use of walking on a ledge, right? And you try to start walking on a ledge, and you can't really take the step where you're going to fall.
Right.
or that, like, you're walking along a line. I did this one, and I was just wobbling for no reason, even though I knew I was walking across the floor.
Right.
And that there was no reason for me to wobble at all. But when I was looking down and seeing a huge drop before me, and I was walking on tightrope, you felt like you were really there. So it's immersive. It's got this sense of presence. But I don't see the Blockbuster app yet, right?
Right.
I don't see these experiences lasting for a long time, or maybe there's like a miscalculation on what is really appealing here. So like the Eve Valkyrie game I've been playing, it kind of goes on and on. Like, you can keep shooting things for a long time. But I feel like that game could be more like an arcade experience where I might be done after shooting down one alien spaceship, because I'm getting all hot and sweaty while I'm in there. If it took me 5 minutes to shoot this thing down, then I don't want to do this over and over and over again as I would if I were just sitting on the couch. Right. And so to me, that's a mismatch. And then are these things going to be demos like, say, the Blue, which is a very cool underwater demo where you see a big giant whale swimming by you. It's a very cool experience, but it's very short. I wouldn't pay money for this, and so where's the $40 experience on
Right.
VR?
So everything that you're describing makes it sound like it's a bit of a fad and won't sort of last very long because it's all about the technology and not so much about the greater experience. What do you think that is there something that you're waiting for, like something that's perhaps more subtle than games have been in the past in terms of narrative? Or
Yeah, I do think the VR folks and the younger, say, mobile game makers have a lot to learn from the AAA console companies that have all sort of wound up in this space of games like The Last of Us or Assassin's Creed or whatever, Watch Dogs. I mean, they're very involved, very interesting narrative stories that are compelling and are, say, better than movies, and really sort of inspire you to keep going on and on. And so I don't think the younger generation has sort of taken those narrative lessons and run with them yet into this new medium. And I would hope that at some point they do, because I think that's sort of key to some of these problems of, like, you create a game and it doesn't stand out. It's
Right.
one in a million games, right? Or it's a game that you pick up for a very short session and never pick it up again. What are some of the games that people will come back to over and over again? Definitely some companies have cracked that, and that's one of the spectacular things that has happened in, say, mobile games. And I would fully expect some good results to happen in VR. But it's like the odds are so ever not in your favor here, right? Just a handful of successful companies are going to sort of define the industry, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you must have seen that pattern before, when mobile kind of emerged, or social with Zynga, and so are you starting to see that pattern, and can you sort of predict when you look at companies, like when you look at VR companies today, are you sort of seeing, okay, well, that one's not going to be around, that one's not going to be around? Do you see that, or? Well,
like the venture activity is very interesting to just keep track of now and watch. Where Boost VR said that last year, everybody was inspired. All the VCs were inspired a little late when Facebook put down $2 billion for Oculus, and then they said, "Oh, let's invest in VR now." And it's like, wait a minute, that might be the biggest exit that ever happens in VR, right? So why are you doing it? But they all rushed in, and this Boost VR invested in 34 companies last year in VR, and that's like an investment every 10 days. And they're just like throwing money at every startup. But they actually said that they talked to more than 1,000 startups.
Wow.
It's like, wait a minute, there are 1,000 VR startups out there asking for money right now. So wow, it's like they come out of nowhere. They all have some kind of plan or idea, and everybody is jumping onto this bandwagon. And then you see funds getting formed, like Fund Plus, or actually Calapo made one. Yesterday, Greece started a $12 million VR fund. Presence Capital, $10 million VR fund. So all of the people are rushing into VR. All of the money is going there. It's some into AR as well. The funny thing was when Fund Plus decided to start this $50 million fund in February to invest in mobile games. And they were like, what? What are you guys doing? Everybody else is rushing into VR. And they said, well, this is our contrarian strategy. which is, there are almost no VR units out there right now. There are 1.5 billion mobile phones out there. If we invest in something and it becomes a hit, we have a potential for 1.5 billion people to play that hit if we invest in mobile games. And no matter how big a hit becomes in VR right now, we can't get our money back from that VR investment. So it's kind of a smart contrarian thing to do, because what's happened as everybody goes into VR is that the values that were once associated with mobile games and mobile game companies and startups have now fallen. And so FunPlus can invest, like I say, a smaller amount of money per deal. It still has potential to get big hits in this space. And so, they may be onto something there. Some of the VCs who have gone into VR, though, have said, well, wait a minute, you're going to use all of that money you're investing in a mobile game to do user acquisition. And you're going to try to go up against Supercell and Machine Zone and King. And you're going to try to push something up the charts, by spending all this money on advertising your game. That is not a good use of our, VC money, right? Because you're trying to win a war against people who've already won it.
Right.
So, anyway.
Yeah. How do you feel about console? We were just talking about how that has plateaued, but there's lots of interesting mechanics or microtransactions that are sort of now coming from mobile and moving into console. Is that something that you sort of feel like consoles is going to have new life from that, and that's also?
I think the Wargaming folks, the CEO, said that there's a smaller audience on PlayStation compared to the PC for a free-to-play game, and free-to-play games really need this large audience because such a small percentage of the players actually pay for something. But they found that the behavior on the PlayStation is that a larger percentage of people will pay for something in a free-to-play game. And so you have people who are used to paying for things on the consoles, and more free-to-play games are debuting and finding that they're having an easier time. Like Zynga has a bit of a hard time because 2% of the players in their audience will ever buy something, right? But maybe if the number is more like 10% on PlayStation, that changes a lot of the math and makes it possible to succeed on that platform.
Do you think that this fragmentation of the industry is kind of what is causing the what's happening at E3? That event is sort of imploding because a lot of publishers are sort of pulling out and having their own events?
I don't know what's happening with E3. I don't like it's almost like it is, say, the one event that each year exposes the game industry to billions of people and billions of impressions, right? And so it is a very successful event in that way, and who would not want to be part of it? Well, EA started this and pulled out, saved themselves maybe $8 million or something like that by doing that. And they say that they're going to do more fan events. And so one interpretation is that maybe the press that goes to E3 is not as important to them anymore. Usually there's something like 4,000 press that show up among the 50, 60,000 people that show up there. If you're going direct to your fans, you're doing it through things like, say, Twitch or YouTube. And those are the influencers now. And you maybe try to hold fan events, and you get those fans to show up and just start, talking about your event and your games, and you're just sort of bypassing the traditional media. And maybe that's the right thing to do. as far as strategy goes these days. It makes me feel less important, but I'm not the only one that would sort of suffer that way. I think the industry collectively would suffer if E3 collapsed,
Right.
And there was nothing to replace it, because it is a something of a neutral ground, which I value, as seeing something like that in the industry. You don't want to get left with nothing but company-controlled events throughout the whole industry, right? I mean, Disney's not going to welcome EA into their fan event, right?
Right. Does that change things for you if you're covering an event like that? Because now you've got, I guess E3 actually did themselves. They in 2006, I think they separated the event into lots of different places. When you think about going to E3 this year, are you first of all planning to go? And when you go, do you have a plan of how you're gonna?
Yeah, it doesn't change it too much for me, because what EA sort of dismantled was the 20,000 square foot booth in the middle of the show floor. That was a bit painful to get to and see anything at, because it was always very overcrowded. They kept their press conference, which they're going to do in Sunday of E3. They're going to have some other kind of fan event that probably the press can get into as well. And then they have meeting spaces where I can go and do interviews. And so it's still valuable to me that way. And they're not entirely pulling out, because they're keeping the parts that they see as valuable, I think. And I think, though, it's interesting to watch some of the companies that have pulled out. Activision Blizzard, Blizzard has BlizzCon. It's a very successful fan event. And when you've got BlizzCon, you go oh, do I need E3 if I've got BlizzCon? And then Disney pulled out as well. And Disney has a very successful fan event in the fall, which is, where they unveiled a ton of Star Wars related, information last year. So the companies that are pulling out, maybe think they've got their own little E3s, I guess.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about, given this sort of current climate, you created this article, which is over here. If you guys want to check it out. And it basically talked about. Okay, well, hopefully you got that. We'll try.
How to get your game covered in the press. Yeah. If you searched on Game PR and DeanBeat and VentureBeat, you would find it. Yeah.
So I'll be right back. But that was it's a really great article for how to approach the press and sort of the do's and do nots. We've got a little bit of a different environment now because of all the YouTubers and sort of celebrities, and so is this still valid? Is there anything?
I think for us, I mean, this was more the quirks of GamesBeat / VentureBeat on how we like to be approached, and and we have our own tastes for everything, and I think every publication is a little different that way, and I think there's probably a lot of publications that would sort of completely disagree with some of the things that I write in this, and one of the things I like is just being able to plan a little bit. And know what's coming, and then decide what's really important for me to cover, based on what I see coming in the next couple of weeks or so. So I like a lot of notice. And if somebody approaches me and says, "Hey, I got a story for you. Can you keep it secret for a week or two?" Or say yes. There are other press who will say, "No, if you tell me, I will write about it right now. If I think it's good." Right. And that's not a safe environment for people who need PR, for companies. So we try to create our own sort of safe environment for being approached with news that is kind of secret until a certain point in time. And then so So give me a week, give me 2 weeks, but don't give me overnight, right? Like, 8 o'clock at night, you say, hey, Dean, I got a story for you. It's breaking, tomorrow at 7 a.m. And we're like, okay. This happens a lot still, and it just really annoys me because like then I add it as like the 7th story that I have to do that night because I'm behind on keeping track of, of getting all these stories done. We call them embargoes, like you embargo to a certain time, like say 7 a.m. Thursday, but you tell me about it on a Tuesday or a Monday or something, and we will stick to that time, like we will agree to it. As long as nobody else breaks that embargo and publishes before that or early, right? Mm-hmm. If somebody does that, then the embargo is broken, it's off, the agreement is off. We write about it when we want to, or we just don't write about it.
Right.
Well. So that's how we like to get approached. We have all these other quirks, like we run a horizontal image. So if you send us a vertical image, we're going to ask for one back. So I put that into this story so that we can get more horizontal images from the get-go, right? Right. I think also like some of the interesting part of this story is that we like to tell a story, right? And if you are one of a million developers, I don't see what your story is. I just see this is one more game, and this is one more startup approaching me to do a story. And so I have to get to know what the story is. And the picture on this story is one of Teresa Duringer, mm-hmm. who's probably, she probably comes to these things, right? But she's a second generation game developer. Like her mother was a game developer at EA. Mm-hmm. And she was telling me about her game. And as soon as she said, my mom makes games, I said, what? Mm-hmm. Like, that doesn't happen in this industry, right? It's such a young industry mm-hmm. that you don't see these people. So all of a sudden, she's like a unicorn in my eyes, right? So like, I have never run into somebody whose parent also worked in the video game industry. Right? So tell me about that. What was it like growing up? Right? Mm-hmm. And so that clearly became like her angle on why she was different, why her story was interesting, and it was very memorable. And so, we wound up writing about it. And so she's in the picture as an example of, okay, somebody's got a unique story. Like, I think it's kind of like covering sports in the Olympics, right? And whoever's doing the Olympics will do a close-up profile of someone who's in the Olympics and tell their story. American Idol did it too, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like, this is what makes this person really unique and unusual, and here's why they're here. Mm-hmm. A lot of these stories are underdog stories as well. That's actually the theme of our GamesBeat Summit is sort of underdogs. And I read the book David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell, which I would recommend to everybody because mm-hmm. it's just a collection of some really good stories about underdogs who won, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a narrative that everybody loves. Everybody loves it when Goliath gets taken down, right? And if you've got one of those to tell, then tell it, right? Don't pitch me something about the gameplay. Pitch me your David and Goliath story, right? And that's what I like. And to me, that's more, one of the rewarding and fun things about doing my job is that when you find these things, you get excited. Mm-hmm. You find these stories, the value that sort of a narrative that gets that fits in very well with some kind of underdog story or David and Goliath story.
Yeah.
So
it's that was really
mm-hmm.
that was a really interesting part of that article. It's not. I mean, there's lots of really great information in that because you also have your PR representative talk about very specifically and give points about what they're looking for. So, but narrative in games and telling stories in games has been a topic that a lot of game developers have come to this stage and talked about. The importance of narrative and the importance of story. And it's interesting to see it in your industry too, and that it's so important to tell a compelling story, because it's why anyone would care about anything.
Yeah. And then, sometimes some of the controversy becomes over whether to hire a PR person, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a one-person shop, that's a very expensive thing to hire somebody who might cost you, $15,000 a month for a few months before you launch your game or something like that, right? So, but some of these PR people are good, and if they're good, then they get my attention over and over again, and so they have a better hit rate for getting stories done on their clients, right? And so then it's like, well, they can show you, like, well, the last 10 clients I had 10 stories on them, right? VentureBeat bid on all of them. So somewhere along the line, they might be doing something right, even though they are very expensive people, I guess.
Right. Yep. So I wanted to open up the floor to questions, and wanted to see if anyone had a question for Dean.
Or I could ask myself some more questions.
You're really good at that. Yes. Yeah.
My question is going to be along the same lines when we started. I don't think that mobile games per se have reached their plateau. I think the direction that we're going to start going now is just hyper monetization in gaming. Meaning you actually have a way where you can charge a penny for an item in a video game, and it can actually still go through if you use it Bitcoin, Litecoin, or my gaming company, we have our own coin, Gamerholic coin, which is a tradable coin. Right? So you think about what this does to the dynamics of gaming now. Right? The coin is going up on the exchange. What should happen in your video game? The coin is going down on the exchange. What should happen in your video game? And it'll be great if, well, I would like to have your opinion on how you see cryptocurrency playing a part in gaming.
Right now, that's something that's going over my head, so I don't think I have a good answer on it. I have not seen, Bitcoin to me is sort of like one of these waves that went through its hype cycle, right? And so now it's sort of on the downswing, and whatever was full of hype about it, like, I don't know, did you buy Bitcoin at like $600 or something? Or
I don't know how to buy Bitcoin.
So it is way down in value, I guess, but the idea behind it is probably still valid, in that at some point it could take off again, and I don't think that a game is the thing yet that is going to cause that to take off, right? But once it does, then it becomes smart to integrate it into your games, right? And so I think something else really has to be, like, say, the trigger for getting people to use Bitcoin in a much bigger way, or use cryptocurrency in a much bigger way. I think it can happen. I mean, we have very strange things happening in our sort of digital economy these days, and Bitcoin in places like China, would be very, very interesting, right? You're evading the authorities as you spend your money online, and can you stay undiscoverable when you're doing that? There's just a lot of interesting questions.
Right? So supposedly Blizzard is launching their own blockchain. It'll be a private blockchain on their platform, but they're definitely looking into the cryptocurrency realm.
Yeah. And then
It shouldn't be closed, in my opinion, but of course they're going to keep it closed.
So I would look for a bunch of examples of that kind of thing happening, and then that just becomes more of a signal for you, I guess, that it's real.
Just to jump in, there are actually like casino games that have millions of users that use Bitcoin. They're not that well known, I guess.
And I guess they have a good reason for that, right?
I mean, hyper monetization, I don't think it's something that that is possible now, regardless what payment platform you're using.
Yeah, you had a question.
Yeah. What do you think about all the large publishers jumping into the esports and competitive game space? And do you think that they're going to be able to actually significantly change the landscape, or just latch
I think it's a big trend, and it's definitely worth them all paying attention to, because things like League of Legends and Riot Games, all Riot Games probably needs for the rest of its existence is to have League of Legends, right? They could run a good business just based on what they built, and so kudos to them for starting a lot of it. But I also don't know what some of these people intend to do. Like, Electronic Arts made Peter Moore into its chief competition officer. Like, what is his job? What is he going to do on a daily basis? And shouldn't your teams be making games that are naturally esports friendly games from the start? It's not something you can layer into a game after it's been built. It just has to be something that fans like, and they like it so much that they play it as a sport. And so the seed for a great esports game starts with the design of the game, right? It doesn't come after the game is finished, and then you decide, we're going to promote this, in a stadium, right? We're going to rent out a stadium, and we're going to have a contest, and we're going to have a tournament, and we're going to turn this into an esport, right? That's not the beginning of making something into an esport. So I'm kind of in a big state of confusion about it right now. Sometimes this is where I wonder in journalism, right, whether the people who are actually really close to this, on the ground, seeing and listening to esports events, maybe are the ones who have more of the answer right now than I do, because I can't really name an esports star right now,
right,
that I know and that I follow, right? I go on Twitch and I watch a Call of Duty game to try to understand how these people can do what they do and how to get better, but I don't necessarily remember who they are. And so it's like a phenomenon that has rabid fans and people who follow a lot of the athletes that I don't understand right now. So it's like I'm up too far above where the culture is, or the subculture, that I don't understand. So anyway, esports is big. It's like not understandable to me at the moment, but I'm looking for where I can get more understanding. I thought it was a funny thing when Activision Blizzard formed the esports division that they have, and said we're going to be like the ESPN of esports. And then like a couple weeks later, ESPN starts something and says we're going to be the ESPN of esports because we're already ESPN. And then a few weeks after that, EA does it, right? And it's like, why do they do this? Are they doing this to make investors happy, or is it because they're really doing something with these divisions?
So red T-shirt at the back.
You talked about the danger of losing that neutral ground at E3 if it were to kind of collapse in on itself. What would you believe to be maybe the neutral ground that would rise to replace it, or multiple ones that kind of fill in that vacuum that exists for journalism?
But a good thing for San Francisco right now is the GDC is stronger than ever, right? And that feels a little more like a good neutral ground. It's a little more authentic because I think it has a very strong, advisory board that is full of game developers that determine where it goes. And they have this nice sort of division between sponsored talks that are paid for by particular companies and talks that are more like what they deem to be sort of fit for broader interest, right? And so you can't really buy a keynote at the GC right now, and they only bestow the keynotes rarely upon people who really have something to say. And not just, and they won't give a keynote to, say, Nintendo every year. They'll only do it when Nintendo's got something to say, right? And so that's very good sort of neutral ground, I think, for the industry. And I almost wish there were more events that were structured that way, right? But there are some events I haven't been to, like Gamescom. I've never been there. doesn't seem to be structured that way. I mean, it's a lot of company press conferences, right, that happen there, or just a big giant mob on the floor, the show floors. So GDC is what I hope would be almost like not necessarily the replacement for E3. I think the publishers also need their place to do what they do. But yeah, the publishers have to figure it out more. I think the GDC has been figured out.
Yeah, so I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. So, Chris.
I got like a 2-in-1. What's up with Twitch and Amazon? They got a new game engine. Are they serious?
Well, like the platform owners always seem to be the companies that have accidental interests in the game industry, right? If you look back at Apple and they create the iPhone, and they have no app store at first. It comes along a year later because people ask them for it. And then games appear on that platform. And Apple didn't do anything to encourage games. And in fact, it was still run by a guy who hated games, right? And so games are like this sort of virus that sneak onto any platform that exists, right? And they sort of co-opt it into a game platform. And I think that happens with every large platform now. So Google has a very large accidental game business. Amazon has one now too. But the unusual thing is, like, you see intention when they go out and buy something, right? And so Amazon may have developed an accidental game business through its app store because it was trying to compete with Apple, or it was trying to shoot Google in some way, and they wind up with this game business and they say, hey, this is not bad, so let's add to it, right? And then they add Twitch. And then the game engine part, I still don't see why they've done what they've done, right? And maybe it's like, okay, let's ruin somebody else's business, right? Let's say, these guys are trying to sell their game engines and they're steering them away from our platform. So let's do a free game engine and steer them to our platform, and steer people to AWS, which is where we make our money, right? I think they make their money in AWS. So that's always been somebody's nasty trick, is that if somebody's got a good business, you build around that business, you give away what they're selling for free, and then you destroy their business and you take their business, right? And so it's like a chess move in some larger game, but I don't know what the meta game really is.
I think they're going to win. I guess they're going
that
against
that kind of tactic is very deadly. So Unity and Epic are hoping to sell game engines still, and it could be very hard. So it might be good for those companies that are right now standalone to go and find some friends that would help them.
So, did you have a question, or you?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up. It was a little bit off of your esports comments, but it was, I think, just related to how you see the sort of the state of quote unquote AAA games right now. I mean, what does that really mean these days? And do you see that innovation is, where do you see the state of innovation, I guess, in that business? Because sometimes it seems like a very mature business where the number of players is shrinking and consolidating, the number of developers seems to have shrunk a lot, and even as the technology presumably continues to evolve and people are talking about PlayStation 4.5 and so forth, it's sometimes not really clear exactly, does that just mean a slightly better looking Call of Duty, or is that kind of where we're going to be for the foreseeable future, or do you see some sort of potential inflection point where there's some kind of innovation and things start really growing again?
Well, I have a lot of respect for the people who've stayed in the AAA business because it seems so dangerous, right? It's such a great way to lose a lot of money. And you know, if you miscalculate in some way, then you know you're doomed because you're spending so much money now. And you know, it was brilliant in some ways that Bobby Kotick figured out that the market could sustain a Call of Duty every year, because before that, it would take a few years to do one, and you know it'd be a big hit, but only for that year. And you know, he figured out that the market was so strong that coming out with one every year actually made the flywheel spin faster, right? And that the business got bigger. And then you know, you look at Ubisoft, and they had a miscalculation on that front with Assassin's Creed, which this year, you know, took a tumble, and they decided to finally get off the Assassin's Creed treadmill every year, because the fans are not really liking it that much. So you know, there's very different calculations that have to get made as to what the market's going to tolerate. And then you see these brand new bets come out of nowhere sometimes with the new IP. And so Quantum Break, I think, I actually liked it quite a bit. And I played it through a couple times. And you know, there's kind of a gimmick in there with the TV shows in between each act. But nobody has ever done that. And so like, it's nice to see an innovation in the game business where they were so ambitious that they combined a TV show with an actual game, and the story made sense and came together, and there's sort of a fun part of that in replaying. So like, it's nice to see a brand new AAA franchise get born, and maybe it'll be strong enough for them to keep that going, because every once in a while the fans realize that they're bored with what they've got, and that when someone comes along with something new, they see it and they jump onto it and they say, that's great. So
Yeah. Well,
I can stick around and chat more, so I don't really have to rush out or anything. So
okay. Well, we had maybe like 3 more questions if you're.
Oh, okay.
Would you like to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So yes, you.
I was wondering actually about GamesBeat. What were the kind of articles that drive the most traffic to you? And is there ever an article that you were really surprised by its virality?
Yeah, we're always surprised almost every day by what happens. Like, you know, there could be an article that I work on really hard for a while. It appears and nobody reads it, and then all of a sudden it's like, why did we spend so much time on that? When instead, you know, we should have written about the intersection of virtual reality and porn or something like that, and seen the traffic go crazy, right? But then you say, oh, okay, well, that story on virtual reality and porn did so well that I'm going to do another one, and then that one goes nowhere, right? And you go like, okay, well, so it's on a daily basis. We're just always unsure. Sometimes that's why we maybe write too many stories, and we just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall to see what will stick. But you know, I like to come back to the idea that we're doing, you know, credible stories, quality stories, you know, fair, balanced or smart stories, and in depth, long enough for people to sink their teeth into. So I run a lot of Q&As, and you know, sometimes they're, you know, 1,000 to 5,000 words, right? And we're transcribing a lot of the conversation. And for years, they didn't really get that much good traffic. Nowadays, they're actually getting more traffic because it's unique content that doesn't always get done elsewhere in the game industry. And so we're left standing, and we still do these things. And you know, they're pretty educational or informative for the game industry, and they're getting good traffic. And so it's gratifying to see that, you know, something that we started doing early with no result is now getting some good result.
Yeah. And yes, you, sir.
Yeah, kind of along the lines of the Q&A that you talked about. My favorite that you did was with Niantic on Pokemon Go. I think it was back in the fall.
given that we've seen some information about the beta in Japan and a few other countries, I think New Zealand and Australia, and more in the last 24 hours, it kind of seems like they're out in left field doing their own thing. What's your take on where they're headed, and do you think that could be a sustainable game business?
It sounds like a little like you're following that more closely than I am, but I think that Niantic has a lot of latitude to do what it wants there. Nintendo's and the Pokemon company's sort of oversight on it doesn't seem like it's like a huge amount. That Niantic is not a large company either; it's a pretty small company, and they don't have what you would call a AAA sized team working on Pokemon Go, which in some ways is surprising because like this could be a really big thing. It's like if they do it right, it could be a huge game, and so that makes me think a little more like they're viewed as an experiment. It's up to them to make it good or bad. And if it's good, Nintendo's happy. If it's bad, then we didn't spend too much money on it. But that story, that Q&A was very popular. It stayed very popular for days. It's like one of the stories that we wrote from sort of like this professional business executive point of view that found traction with all the masses of people who play Pokemon. Because they're very hungry for just information about it right now. But I don't know whether it's going to succeed or not, really.
And last one from you, yes.
If I can, a two-part question. I actually first wanted to ask if you have any plans for writing another book on the horizons, sort of similar to opening the Xbox, on any of the range of new bits of technology that are coming out in VR and AR?
Not yet, and I don't think so. It's like the books were not bestsellers, right? For the amount of work you do on a book, it's not unless you're Tom Clancy, which I was not. You don't get a ton of reward for doing a book. You sort of get more of the reward in just establishing a reputation, I think, right, than getting actual money. So still trying to feed my family, I think like good use of my time is doing what I do. And the other problem is the velocity of change and the amount of news and all of the stuff that's happening. It's very hard to pause and stop and say, I'm not going to pay any attention to that. I'm going to go back into history and find out what happened on this project over the last, particular 6 months or a year or so, and to investigate that as much as I can. That's a hard trade-off now, which is, I would feel like I would be dropping out of society for 6 months to a year or more to write that book, and then coming back and seeing like all this stuff I've missed. It's very hard to do that. Right? So,
if I can just follow up.
Yeah.
You mentioned two things earlier when you were talking about VR, and they're kind of interesting, conflicting things. On the one hand, you mentioned that some of it is very arcadey, and then you also mentioned that there's the potential for sort of deeper experiences. And Alex mentioned narrative experiences, for example. It seems like in this new medium kind of coming together, there's potential for both of those, but there also is almost conflict in trying to figure out what the hell they actually do.
Yeah. I mean, I almost prefer the arcade-like experiences because I can get nauseous. I could get sick playing in these experiences for too long. I have not. The good thing is that I have not had one of these games yet that really made me feel that bad. But I have not tried the racing games for that reason, though. Right? When I tried Drive Club over at PlayStation Experience, it did make me sick because there's a part where I was spinning around. Right? I was trying to get back on the track and I was just spinning, and it's like, oh man. that made me sick. So I almost know that some of these action games, I prefer that they exist as arcade-like experiences that are fairly short, because I just don't feel comfortable wearing that thing for such a long time. And that, you know, if it's not making me sick, it's making me sweaty. And it's fogging up, you know, the glasses and all that. And so those experiences should not go on for that long, right? They should not go on for 3 hours if they're making me sweat and breathe heavy and, you know, getting really sort of almost claustrophobic inside that experience. But there are others, I think, that can be done that where you will willingly want to do that, right? It's the other half of the games that don't make you sick or have no chance of making you sick that maybe could be the ones where you're going to play them for much longer because they're more sort of just, you know, very interesting explorations into something you've never seen before.
Great.
So.
Dean, thank you so much for your time. Cheers.